At the peak of his unusual experiment, Arthur Kingston, disguised as a beggar outside his own mansion, experiences the crushing reality of how the world treats those less fortunate. Ignored and ridiculed by passersby, his faith in humanity falters until a humble stranger offers him unexpected kindness, stirring something deep within him. But just when Arthur thinks he's seen it all, a shocking twist leaves him questioning everything he thought he knew about wealth, compassion, and the people closest to him. What he discovers in that final unexpected moment will change his life forever. Stay until the end to witness the powerful twist that turns this extraordinary evening into a life-changing event. But before we dive, leave a comment and let us know where you're watching from today. And if this story speaks to you, hit that subscribe button for more amazing stories. Arthur Kingston was no ordinary man. Known as one of the wealthiest businessmen in the city, his reputation for success and influence preceded him everywhere he went. With a sprawling mansion in the most exclusive part of town, luxury cars parked in his driveway, and a business empire worth millions, Arthur had seemingly everything anyone could ever want. But despite all the trappings of wealth, something was bothering him. Over the years, he had noticed a growing disconnect between himself and the world outside his opulent bubble. He began to wonder, do people treat others differently simply because they appear poor? Arthur had grown up with very little. In his youth, he had experienced firsthand what it was like to struggle, to feel invisible in a world that valued wealth above all else. His rise to the top had been a long and grueling journey, but even after achieving success, he never forgot his humble beginnings. It was this memory of hardship that led him to a strange but intriguing idea. What if he disguised himself as a homeless man and sat in front of his own mansion? He wanted to see how people would react, whether they would show compassion to someone in need or simply ignore him. On a crisp autumn morning, Arthur put his plan into motion. He dressed in a pair of old, ragged clothes he had kept from his early days, faded jeans, a worn-out jacket, and a hat that had seen better days. He grabbed a small cardboard sign, scribbled "Need help" in shaky letters, and walked out to the front gate of his grand estate. Sitting on the cold pavement just outside the towering gates of his mansion, Arthur felt a strange sense of vulnerability. His sprawling home loomed behind him. Yet in that moment, he was no longer the powerful businessman, but a beggar, entirely at the mercy of passersby. The street in front of Arthur's mansion was always busy. People admired the mansion from afar, its well-manicured lawns and shimmering windows, a testament to Arthur's success. But now, sitting at the gate in ragged clothes, Arthur saw his luxurious world from a new and humbling perspective. The people who had once admired his mansion didn't stop to appreciate it today. They only saw the beggar at the gate, and many of them found it easy to ignore him. The air was crisp, and the sky a cool shade of blue, but Arthur felt a chill inside that had nothing to do with the weather. The real coldness came from the lack of humanity he was witnessing. The first few hours were disheartening. A middle-aged couple walked by, laughing and chatting. But when their eyes fell on him, their smiles faded. They didn't stop or ask if he needed help. Instead, they hurried past, as if his very presence was an inconvenience. Arthur tried to catch their eyes, but they looked away, avoiding any engagement. Arthur shifted uncomfortably on the cold pavement. Is this how I would have been treated in my youth? He wondered. It was one thing to understand poverty from the outside, but quite another to experience firsthand the way people dismissed him now. Every glance felt like a silent judgment, every step past him an act of rejection. He began to lose hope that anyone would show the slightest bit of compassion. As the day wore on, a young woman in running gear approached. She was jogging along the street, her earbuds tucked in, lost in her own world. Arthur raised his sign slightly as she passed, hoping she would notice. She did, but after a brief glance, she continued on her way, her pace never slowing. Arthur watched her disappear down the road, feeling a sinking sensation in his chest. The traffic on the street ebbed and flowed, and people came and went, but none stopped. Some stared for a moment, some whispered to their companions, but not one offered help or even acknowledged his existence. A group of teenagers walked by, laughing loudly, their backpacks slung over their shoulders. One of them pointed at Arthur and muttered something to his friends. They all chuckled, casting mocking glances in his direction. Arthur sighed. This was worse than he had expected. Even though he knew it was just an experiment, the sting of being treated like an outsider was sharper than he had imagined. He thought back to his younger days when he had struggled to make ends meet. Had things really changed so much, or had people always been this indifferent to the suffering of others? Just as he was about to stand and call the day a failure, a small rusted car pulled up and parked across the street. A woman in her early 60s stepped out. She had graying hair tied back in a loose bun and wore a modest coat. Her shoes were worn, but she walked with a steady, determined pace. Arthur watched as she crossed the street and made her way toward him. The woman stopped in front of him, her eyes soft with concern. "Are you all right?" she asked gently, her voice kind. Not pitying, but genuinely empathetic. Arthur looked up at her, startled by her compassion. I'm just trying to get by," he said, playing the role. His voice, however, held the faintest tremor of real emotion. After a day filled with rejection, the warmth in her tone felt almost overwhelming. She didn't hesitate. Without asking any more questions, she reached into her purse and pulled out a few crumpled bills. "It's not much," she said, offering them to him, "but I hope it helps. You shouldn't have to be out here like this." Arthur blinked, his throat tight with emotion. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman smiled warmly, her eyes twinkling. "Take care of yourself, okay? The world can be tough, but there's always someone willing to help. Don't lose hope." With that, she walked away, leaving Arthur sitting there in stunned silence. Her words echoed in his mind. She didn't have much to give, but she gave what she could. And more importantly, she gave kindness. It wasn't the money that struck him the most. It was the human connection. The simple act of seeing him, really seeing him, when no one else had. Arthur sat there for a while longer, lost in thought. His entire perspective on wealth, status, and compassion had shifted in the span of a single day. How ironic it was that a man with so much could feel so unseen and forgotten when stripped of his wealth's exterior. Just as he was about to gather his things and return to his life of luxury, one more figure appeared. This time, it was his housekeeper, Maria, coming out of the front gates of his mansion. She saw him and stopped in her tracks, her eyes widening in recognition. "Mr. Kingston, is that you?" she asked, disbelief flooding her face. Arthur hesitated, unsure whether to reveal the truth. But Maria was sharp, and she quickly pieced it together. Her expression softened, but she didn't ask questions or scold him for the charade. Instead, she reached into her own pocket, pulling out a few dollars, offering them to him with a compassionate smile. "You never know what people are going through, sir," she said quietly, kneeling down beside him. "But if you can help, you should. That's something my mother always taught me. No matter how much or how little you have, kindness doesn't cost a thing." Arthur felt a lump in his throat as he looked at Maria. The real wealth wasn't in his mansion or his cars. It was in moments like these, moments of genuine human kindness that transcended money and status. From that day on, Arthur Kingston vowed to change the way he lived his life. Because in the end, true wealth wasn't about money at all. It was about the kindness we offer to others and the humanity we share, even when no one's looking.